And we are live. Congratulations, everybody. You made it through the week. Another week of fantastic food safety, food quality, amazing products that we all enjoy every single day. The problem, if you work in food safety and quality assurance, is if you do a good job, nobody notices. But guess what? I notice and Caitlin notices, and we're here to tell you today, good job. We really appreciate all you do. You make our lives really awesome. Thank you. If you're new, my name is Bryan Armentrout, and this is the Food Safety Chat. I'm with the Food Leadership Group, and every Friday at 8 a.m. Mountain Time, 10 a.m. Eastern, we do a live stream and we talk about all things food safety. And what's cool about this is not a lecture. This is a conversation, and this is meant to provide a platform to share information and provide hopefully a little bit of new stuff that you may have not thought about before. So it's always fun. I always love this when I get to bring on a new guest. And today we have a new victim for the Food Safety Chat. And her name is Dr. Karolenko. How are you doing today, Caitlin?
I am fantastic. How about yourself, Bryan?
Yeah, not too bad. I mean, one of the things that we love to do here on the chat, we were talking about this a little bit here before we went live, is where you're at in the world and what your weather's like. And so I am in Loveland, Colorado, where fall has definitely begun. We're dipping down now at night. I think last night it got into the low 40s. So you start thinking about your plants and your sprinkler systems and all that fun stuff. But during the day, it still warms up really, really nice. So it's going to be around 80 degrees here today. So hopefully I'll be able to get out and enjoy some vitamin D. Where are you at, Caitlin?
I am just outside of Washington, D.C. It's a little overcast today. Hopefully the sun will peek out later today, but we're looking at high 70s today. So can't complain about that.
Oh, good. Tim's here. And Tim is one of our road warriors. And a lot of times when Tim is out meeting with clients and doing what he does, he tries to get back home to Tennessee, and it doesn't always work out for whatever reason. I always feel bad for Tim when he's online. You'll follow him on LinkedIn. And you're like, it's almost like, it's like Where's Waldo type thing or something like that, where you're following Tim as he's kind of going across the country trying to get back home. Cheryl's here. Elena, good to see Elena. Yep. Cool here in Denver for sure. Corey's in St. Louis. You can always tell the travelers, they use the airport abbreviations when they put stuff. So Tim's got some awesome weather. So cool. Love it. So one of the things that we do here on the Food Safety Chat, Caitlin, is everybody join us for a drink of your favorite beverage. Go Huskies. Cheers. Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. And I'm sorry to do this to you, Caitlin, but one of the things that we've got going here on the chat now is the dad joke. Are you ready for the dad joke?
I'm ready.
Okay, here we go. Why did the coffee file a police report?
Ooh, that's a good one. I don't know.
Because it got mugged.
It's a good one. It's a good one.
I'm zeroing in on this process. I'm getting themed dad jokes. So it's kind of like tier 1 is a dad joke. Tier 2, a dad joke that is on the theme for the chat. So
well, I appreciate you upping the ante for me today.
I had to. I just absolutely had to. Austin, don't do it. Don't do it. So gosh, we got a ton of stuff to cover here today. So one of the things that we do here on the chat is, especially when we have new guests on the show, Caitlin, is, tell everybody a little bit about you and what you do and all that fun stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. So I am a food microbiologist by training. I currently work for IFANS, or the Institute for the Advancement of Food and Nutrition Sciences, called IFANS affectionately. It's a nonprofit organization that focuses on advancing food and nutrition science for public benefit. That's obviously a huge umbrella. So we break it down into different programs or specialty areas. Given my background in food microbiology, I'm in charge of the Food Microbiology Program Committee. So we work to proactively understand and control microbial food hazards. We do this through convening experts, hosting workshops, and funding external research on stuff like dry sanitation, which I believe is the topic of the day.
Absolutely. And I don't see him here yet, but yeah, Neil had said that he was hopefully going to be on the chat here today, an amazing expert in this area as well. So we should have some really good back and forth. And that's what's fun about the chat as we go through this, Caitlin, as you'll see, is that we get some really, really cool expertise that joins us on these chats. So as you see messages pop up that you want to address, feel free to say, hey, Bryan, here's a cool question. Let's talk about this.
Yeah,
So those are always fun. New Jersey Peanut and Tree Nut Processors Association.
Oh, wow.
Very cool. Little side note here. Yesterday I was on a conference call, and as we know, so FDA is going through this huge reorg, and we're starting to get more information on how this works and how FDA human foods is being separated out. You can kind of see here in the background. So this is Bill Marler's T-shirt that he had created, "Get the F out of FDA," which always cracks me up. Kind of separating out food from everything else, which they've done. I'm sure that Bill had no small influence on that. So thank you, Bill. But what's interesting on this, Kaylin, is that you're kind of at the hub of all these type of activities. And I was on this call and they were talking about some of the new names. It's like, okay, well, SIFSAN, right? These names that we've gotten used to,
Yep.
Gone, it's going to be called something else. ORA, gone, going to be called something else. So massive upheaval going on within FDA. And I was just kind of curious, and it's a little off topic, but you're right there in the heart of it. Are you guys seeing any of that with your organization yet?
We're starting to. So we do have FDA participation in a lot of our committees. So yeah, we are starting to see it. We're starting to hear it. I don't know that I'll ever get used to not saying SIFSAN. I think that'll forever be in my repertoire. So yeah, that's going to be
I mean, it got drilled into our heads, and it was this catchy little, and a lot of times they don't work out too well, but that one just kind of was like, yeah, that was a good one.
Yep, I agree. Yeah, but it'll be interesting to see how that plays out over the coming months and what new acronyms we all need to get used to now.
Yeah, exactly. And so Duncan said there was a recall. So Duncan's over on the other side of the pond, and pate, listeria, and salmonella. Okay, that's an interesting one. You would imagine as well that a lot of the processing similar to that would be, what we're seeing with boar's head here and listeria in their liverwurst. So I'd be curious. Thanks, Duncan. We'll see how that thing kind of plays out. So one of the things, Caitlin, here on the chat, one of our regular guests, we'll have to get Jose on here again pretty soon, is Jose's an amazing food safety expert. He does tons of consulting. He's a fantastic trainer, and he's also working on the legal side of things. And there's a little voice that now exists in my head. It's like that anytime we start a chat, and if there's a topic, Jose was always like, okay, we need to define our terms and what we're talking about. I'm like, so that's just become incorporated into the culture of the food safety chat. So part of this then is, with my guest, is kind of starting with those basics and saying, what is dry sanitation? How do you think of that?
Yeah, so dry sanitation to me would be a sanitation process with minimal to no water. I'm immediately thinking this is going to be crucial for low water activity, low moisture foods. Bacteria need water to grow. So you take that out and you can use that as a way to protect your food in the absence of a heat lethality step. So I'm thinking, this is particularly relevant for like flours, nuts, cereals, powdered milks, all of those good dry products. So when it's really critical with dry sanitation and with those kind of products to prevent that introduction of water into that cleaning process, because by adding that water into that process, now you're adding water to support microbial growth, and now you have potentially a contamination issue on your hands. So yeah, a cleaning process or a sanitation process without the minimalization of water would be how I would define that.
Yeah, and that's a really good point, because a lot of times, if you're working with products that are naturally microbial resistant, so low water activity, things like this, people can kind of get complacent. And we found this out with products like peanut butter. It's like, oh, it's peanut butter. What can you do about peanut butter? And as I'm sure Aaron can testify to in a lot of different ways, we found out that peanut butter can be really, really risky. There was a very high profile warning letter and activities with a Jif plant where they had water in the facility where it infiltrates. And that's all you really need. And if you are producing, to your point, Caitlin, flour or something like this, and you have resident salmonella that's in that facility, right? It's just waiting. It's waiting for the right opportunity.
Yep, it just needs the right opportunity and the right ingredients to grow. Now you've got a big problem on your hands.
Definitely. And so part of this as well is with that dry sanitation piece of it, other risks then tend to pop up as well too. So as we were kind of talking about this, getting ready for the chat, pest control, right? Pest control can be really, really difficult. We talked about that last week as well, because you have
Mhm.
very unique pests then that you have to be worried about.
Yep, no, absolutely. I mean, part of that dry sanitation is going to be that physical clean, that initial step
Mhm.
in that process, and that's going to be to remove all of that extra food debris that's compiling, and that could be, also an attractor to not only microorganisms but also to pests as well. So
Mm.
getting a really thorough physical clean as your first step prior to sanitization is going to be key.
That's a good point. And yeah, let's kind of look at that at a high level. Generally, with dry sanitation, then, Caitlin, what are the different steps associated with the dry sanitation process?
Yeah, absolutely. So, like I mentioned, there's going to be that first physical clean. That's going to be you're using your brushes, using your vacuums to
Mhm.
get rid of all of that debris. We didn't talk about this a second ago, but also to get rid of that debris for any biofilm formation. That's
Mm.
another concern. So, yeah, that physical clean is going to be your first major step. And then once that's thoroughly physically cleaned, removing all that debris, then you get into your sanitization.
Mhm.
Typically, it's going to be some sort of ethanol or isopropyl blend to that evaporates quickly, doesn't have any water. Another alternative could be possibly a chlorine dioxide gas treatment. So either one of those, but the sanitization step without the water, essentially. So
Mhm.
physical clean and then sanitization.
And part of this too, relative to the chemical treatment within these different facilities, regs and what's allowed and what's not allowed has really changed over the years, because it used to be you would bring in a dry load of grains or flours or something, and that supplier had treated that, with a brominated gas or things like this, and all of that's going away. Uh, Alternatives are irradiation, and people kind of go, ew, when you talk about
That's a
irradiation.
tough one, yeah.
And heat, right? You can, heat treatment and things like this. So the tools in your toolkit for dry sanitation, it's a much harder box in some ways to operate in, isn't it?
Yeah, I would agree. You do have some limitations, some sort of, I know we were talking in the prep call about worker safety as well with those chemical treatments, making sure that your equipment is cooled down enough to use things like isopropanol and ethanol that do have high flash points or low flash points. So, yeah, there's a lot of considerations when choosing the best dry sanitation technique for your facility. And it depends,
Mhm.
right? That's every microbiologist's favorite phrase. It depends on your facility and how it's designed.
Yeah, that's a good point, because that's a lesson that I've always tried to teach the non microbiology people within companies, for example. Right? Is no, there's a big difference between micro testing and chemical testing. You're dealing with hopefully what is a homogeneous sample where your pH is going to be pretty much the same through the process. Or micro, no, it's not. Right? You got a little bit of
Yep.
stuff here, you got a little bit of stuff there. You can culture it up, but it may not want to grow, and it may be heat stressed or things like this. And this is always something to watch out for in plants is, oh, we had a positive hit on a micro test, and all right, we'll go back and do some more resampling. Oh, okay, the resamples are all fine. Maybe, right?
Yep. It's not a
The
guarantee,
negative,
obviously.
it's not a canceling game. A negative does not cancel out a positive in this particular situation.
I agree. And I see a comment just came in from Larry about biofilm formation, and I know we kind of glossed over that really quickly, but yeah, absolutely, that physical clean is going to be crucial to get rid of all of that food debris that can then feed any residual bacteria that's still there and create that bioformation. And that's a sticky, pun intended, mess
Ah,
that you're now in if you have that biofilm formation. So yeah, great point.
well, no, that's a good point, Larry, and thank you for bringing us back to that, Larry, because we had a million different things going on here with this topic. Is so generally, then, Caitlin, with biofilm formation in production facilities, it's usually associated with water. Is that still the case then with dry formation of biofilms, or what do you see?
Yeah, so it's a combination of the water and that food that's going to feed that microorganism. So if you have buildup of product in your lines, and then that microorganism is now feeding on that residual food product, creating that biofilm. So yeah, it's a combination of a few things that lead to that formation.
Hmm. Interesting. That is really interesting. So, um, any particular areas of biofilm formation from a microbial standpoint that would differ with a wet process? I mean, so for example, like a listeria or something that's able to, kind of get in a niche and be in a wet environment where it's got that type of, constant nutrient source. Are there any other selective organisms on the dry side that are more likely to do that? Cronobacter, I don't know. Cronobacter, I don't think forms a biofilm.
No, no, it's going to be more of your listeria. It's the physical. It's just going to come down to your physical removal of that, and making sure that your physical step is thorough enough to clean, and making sure you're getting rid of all that. So it's not a difference in organism. It's coming down to your cleaning protocol.
So it all gets back to, making sure that you're controlling that environment correctly. So another piece of this that we talked about a little bit that I want to kind of circle back around as well is equipment. I've been in dry facilities and done audits, and to your point, Kaylin, you were talking about, the important first step is to clean up all the dry residue that's sitting around using brooms and whatever. And a lot of times I will see then vacuums. And the vacuums I see look like they just came out of Home Depot. And you're like, is that really, is that now just a really efficient methodology for them for collecting the stuff and then spreading that exhaust over the room and just redistributing everything?
I suppose. I haven't personally seen that, so I don't know what the justification is there. I would assume you'd probably prefer something more filtered, and a
Yeah.
more specialized technology. I also hope that it's being kept in purely the dry area that you're cleaning, that it's not being used elsewhere, like you're not vacuuming your office with it and then pulling it back into the dry facility. So I'm hoping it's being segregated, to that area that you're intended using. So your dry cleaning tools should be kept in your dry area and not
Yeah,
used
that's a
anywhere
good.
else. Yeah.
Yeah, good point. A part of it too, from like you have really fancy vacuums, HEPA filter, pharmaceutical type clean room vacuums that capture everything coming back out, and those suckers are expensive, but it's definitely money well spent. And and to your point, Kaylin, right? You need to have, if you have a plant, because a lot of times you have a combination plant. You'll have, like the example we were talking about was a dairy processor. So let's say that they're making cheese, and 90% of the waste stream from cheese is the way that's left over when you make the cheese. And people were very ingenious and said, oh, what do we do with this stuff? And they figured out ways to fractionate it and dry it. So now you've got this wet process that is creating also a dry product. And those two things need to be treated very differently in that facility.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, your hygienic zoning is going to be great for that, whether that's some sort of physical barrier or a visual separation of those two processes. Again, mentioning keeping everything separate. Your cleaning tools should not jump back and forth. I mean, it can go the other way too. You can start off with a dry product and go to wet. So if you're bringing in flour that's going to make a dough product,
Ah.
so now you're doing the reverse of that. So it can go both ways. But yeah, making sure that you're keeping those two hygienic, using your hygienic zoning to keep those two zones separate, to reduce contamination.
Yep, it all comes down to people, plant, and process, and part of that, and something to think about here, and that's what we try and do here on the chat as much as we can, Caitlin, is give ideas of people, things for people to think about. Because a lot of times at night you'll have a sanitation crew, and are there dedicated crews for wets and dry? So if you have a wet crew that goes in there and cleans that cheese equipment and then trots over into the dry area, maybe not a good idea. What are you cross contaminating when you do that? Plus, it's a completely different mindset.
Oh,
So a lot of times the sanitation crews that deal on the wet side of the business, everything gets foamed down, and you go into the plant at night and you watch what these guys are doing. And they got the whole suits on and they're just going crazy. Not what you want to do on the dry side for sure.
no, absolutely. That's a great point.
Yep, great comments, guys. Keep them coming here. Thanks, Tim. We got a suggestion here on a company for equipment. Thanks, Tim. Appreciate that. Make sure everybody sees that. Because part of that is you got to have the right tools if you're going to do the job. Because part of it too is there's a really big chunk of risk associated with dry versus wet. So one of the things that we were talking about is, what are your clean breaks? And this is something that is super important in food manufacturing from a food safety standpoint. So I call them, Caitlin, bookends. So, CIP, and then you run, and then you shut down, and you've got another CIP, that period of product that's in between. What interval are you comfortable with if there is an issue? What are you doing with rework? And we'll kind of talk about these different subjects too. On the dry side, these windows tend to be really big, don't they?
Oh, I love that you used, I heard the word risk come up, and I'm going to use the phrase again. It depends. of
Mhm.
what kind of risk you're willing to take. So yeah, I mean, introducing water into that system is going to be your biggest risk. So how
Yeah.
long are you willing to risk and go without introducing, potential water or introducing that clean break into the system? How long are you willing to go?
Mhm.
Obviously, there's some other factors that go into that. Quality of the product can go into that. You run your system for so long, there's eventually going to be some sort of potentially quality issue that's going to come into play. Eventually your equipment needs to be maintenance. That can go into it. So yeah, there's a wide variety of factors that go into your time interval and how long you want to run your system for.
Right. That's a really good point. And so part of this is the constant back and forth between operations and quality food safety. Because if you're running a drying operation, incredibly energy intensive. Most of the energy in a production facility, if you're doing dry products, goes to the drying process itself. So if you've ever been in a dry plant producing whey powders or things like this, you have these gigantic multi-story tall drying vacuum chambers that are injecting these liquid materials into these drying chambers at like 5,000 psi through these teeny tiny little nozzles. And to your point, the goal with that is you want to keep that equipment running as long as you can, because shutting that down and then restarting and getting all that heat back into the system, wow, that's incredibly expensive. So the plant wants to run that drying equipment as long as they can. That's the most efficient way to do it. But to your point, Caitlin, then that also adds risk into the system, because now your bookend from your cleaning to cleaning is really getting big. And as we've seen in the dry space, you can have some massive recalls. So flour with E. coli and these products with these multi-week runs and millions of pounds get into everything. So your potential risk at the supplier side. So if you're buying flour from a company and using it, to your point, Caitlin, in dough or something like this, and you're making a product in a bakery, the exposure window is huge, isn't it?
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's a great point. Yeah, so that's something you have to take into your risk window, right? So I would also encourage. I think this is a good conversation to talk to your supplier before that's an
Mhm.
issue. So when you agree to take on that supplier, make sure you're talking, understand their process. What
Mhm.
controls do they have in place? So really having that relationship with your supplier probably before a point, so you can understand what they're doing to treat their product before it gets to that point, is also helpful. So just wanted to put a plug in there to know your supplier, talk to your supplier.
Right. Well, and this too is where you need to really put on your microbiology hat. Is if you're looking at buying these suppliers and you get the nice, pretty COA that says, oh, okay, we'll keep with our flour example here. We are buying flour from this flour supply company, and the COA comes in and they're testing for the chemical parameters and they're testing for micro and they're doing the right stuff. They're looking at salmonella, they're looking at E. coli. Let's say that they're doing SPC and yeast and mold to make sure that the quality is looking well. To your point, Caitlin, okay, fine. Uh, what's your sampling protocol? How big is
Right.
your lot size? And there was a huge recall in Minnesota a number of years ago with a non-fat dry milk supplier, and they contaminated all kinds of stuff, including military meal ready-to-eat kits with this flour or non-fat dry milk that was being purchased, and they caused a lot of damage. When FDA went in to investigate, the plant was only pulling like 25 grams out of a production day, which turned out to be like 250, 300,000 pounds of product. And FDA looked at that sampling plan and went, no, you guys are high. There's no way that you can detect with that size of a sample. Recall it all. And it was a massive recall.
Yeah, no, I love that point. And it goes back to the other favorite phrase besides "it depends" is risk management. Yeah, it's great. You can probably not find anything if you take one sample in a very large pot.
Yeah.
But is that really in your best benefit? Are you really going to be able to find the things that you need to find with that small of a sample size? So yeah, it's a balance between supplies and sample size with the risk that you're going to take by not sampling. So it's
Yeah,
a great
yeah,
point.
exactly. And you need to understand the different sampling protocols as well and what FDA is looking at. So what is class one testing and how does that work and how big does your sample size need to be? How are you actually gathering those samples?
Yep.
How do you? Okay. Yep. Supplier, we're doing class 1 testing in duplicate. We're taking 375-gram samples, composites across the runs. Yeah. Okay, great. How are those samples being pulled? Oh, we just take a bag from the beginning, middle, and end, and we take some. No, probably not sufficient. Do you have an auto sampler in place that's automatically getting a little bit of powder out of the entire production run, so you've got a nice clear picture through that? The other piece of this, from a microbiology standpoint as well, Caitlin, is these dry products and how they're produced are stressful on the organisms. And some organisms that are very robust, right? Salmonella is really good at surviving stuff.
Yeah, loves it.
They may be injured.
Back there as well. Yep.
Yeah, exactly. And what type of methodology is your testing lab using to maximize the recovery in making sure that those little damaged guys that are floating around in there have a good chance of growing, because you want them to grow? To your point, Caitlin, you're kind of covering your eyes and not seeing. You're just waiting for a problem to happen.
Yep. No, absolutely. I like that phrase that Duncan used. How hard you look for stuff depends on how much you want to find what you're looking for. I think that's exactly it.
Yep, perfect. Thank you, Duncan. Yeah, keep the questions coming here, guys. So there's a question here from Brent. See what Brent is looking at here. Does the food world ever exchange research and best practices with pharma and healthcare? Oh, so I don't see him here on the chat here today, but we have a fantastic resource here on the chat, Cortland, who is very involved in the lab world, and he has extensive experience in those areas. Short answer to your question, Brent, no, we don't, and it stinks. And I think this is where groups such as the Institute for the Advancement of Food and Nutrition Sciences, teaching, helps. Because what I've seen, Caitlin, I'm sure you see this too, is, okay, yeah, we have segregation between food, medical device, pharma, all these type of things. We don't share information. And even within the food industry, we do a really poor job of sharing information. So the dairy guys don't talk to the meat guys, don't talk to the produce guys. We all have our own little silos. And I think it's most indicative is that hiring practices, for example. If I'm working in a dairy company and I'm getting resumes from a meat quality person, I'm like, they don't know what they're talking about. Really? From what I've learned, it's extremely sophisticated from a microbiology standpoint, what they do in the meat industry. We could learn a ton in the other industries from each other. And good segue on this, Brent, as well, is that's why we do the chat, right? We want to get that cross-pollination within these industries, because food safety, right? It's not a point of competition. We need to share information. And I don't care that Boar's Head, had these terrible flaws and failures in their plant in Jarrett, that it was a meat company, and go, this liver, that doesn't apply to that. No, it absolutely does. As you read through the flaws and the failures in that facility, there's lessons that everybody can take away from that.
No, I think that's, first of all, I love that you brought up that point. And I think, low moisture foods in general is such a broad category, right? So, or we're talking about dry sanitation today, and we talk about low moisture foods. That's such a big, wide variety of food products. Everything from flours and peanut butter to like beef jerky. That's a ready to eat low moisture food that relies on some of these processes. So yeah, it's not a silo to a certain industry. And yeah, I love that idea of collaboration among the different industries to tackle food safety.
There's Cortland. Cortland the lurker, there you are. We know nothing in pharma advice. I find that highly unlikely.
That's just what you're doing, because.
So I saw here some comments. Larry saying he's seen a little bit of technical issues. On my side, guys, everything is looking good. So that's part of the challenge here. But don't forget, right? These videos, you can go back to LinkedIn and watch these with the recording. They remain on there. So there's ways to look at it after the fact. So good. Yeah. So Larry's chiming in on this as well. So yeah, there's tons that we can learn from each other for sure. So really, with that clean break methodology, there's all kinds of different parameters you need to be putting into consideration here. And another one that we didn't mention as well, Caitlin, is how well do you know the supplier? Right? If it's a brand new company that just started up and you have no idea who they are, you need to be very careful, right? If procurement comes to you and says, "Hey, Caitlin, we just got this screaming deal on this flour from this company in Uzbekistan or wherever," oh, really? Okay, well, now my FSMA ears are going up, and I've got a lot of concerns with that. Um, you need to, as you know, Ronald Reagan was famous for saying, trust but verify. Okay, fine, but we're going to make sure that you're doing what you say you're doing. One of the things that people tend to overtrust, Caitlin, on the new supplier side is, okay, well, you're a new supplier, and I need some samples and pre-shipment samples and these type of things. They're like, oh, sure, no problem, we'll send you some stuff. And it comes over to you, and it's absolutely pristine, perfect, right in the middle of the spec. Did that sample actually come from the lot that you're going to be receiving?
It's a great
Maybe,
question. Yeah, and I think I
not.
mentioned it earlier. Yeah, have a relationship with your supplier or potential supplier. Ask those questions. Ask what they're doing. What are their controls in place? Ask those questions.
Yeah,
Can't ask too many questions on that, doing especially when you're receiving that product and it's going to go into another ready to eat product. Obviously, you have a little more flexibility if it's going to go into something that has a heat lethality step. But yeah, if you're putting it into another raw, ready to eat product, yeah, ask those questions. Get to know your supplier. What are they doing? Because that's eventually now going to be your problem, right? If you take on something that is contaminated and you've put it into your product, so now it's your problem too. So better to ask those questions early.
exactly. Well, and that's a really, really good point. So what I wanted to bring on to what you just said there as well, so it doesn't get missed by the audience here, is that I'm always amazed when you're looking at a potential new supplier, right? And you're going through this risk evaluation. To your point, how much volume is this? How's this going to impact my product? What am I actually making within this? What's my risk profile associated with this? Is gathering the documents is fine, but what I found as well, Caitlin, is you can learn a lot by picking up the phone. So there was a previous supplier from a company I had, really critical ingredient we were looking at buying, had no idea who they were, had no ideas of their processes. They were located in Southeast Asia. They sent over their documentation. I started looking at it, and I had questions. So I got the owner of the company on the phone. So we figured out the right time to talk. And I started asking questions and really diving down into that hazard analysis of, okay, well, help me understand what you're doing here, because I don't quite understand what you're up to. And after about 10 minutes of this, he said, hey, Bryan, listen, look, I'm a small company, and what you've been reading through is what I paid the local university to write for me, because I knew that in order to sell in the US, we had to have this food safety plan in place, and this was done so that I could get into the market. Oh, okay. Oh, that's just increased. Did we send somebody over in person to qualify that location? Yeah, absolutely, we did. Because we learned a lot of detail behind the scenes that you didn't necessarily know unless you actually talked with them. So don't take stuff at face value is the lesson from that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's great advice.
So another point on this as well is that sampling side of thing relative to trust is have a tiered sampling program. So if you have a new supplier, start out with a really high sample rate for incoming raw materials. Don't just accept the COA. Nestle does a great job of this. And as you gain trust in them, okay, well, now I'm going to back off to this level of sampling. Now I'm going to bring them down to trusted supplier. Well, that works the other way too, is you can pop that back up if you have any type of an issue. So really understand that, because part of the problem is, and I hear this too, Caitlin, I'm sure you hear this too, I'm curious what you have to say on this, is I'm the end user of, to our example, flour. It's like, oh, okay, well, I'm getting in this flour from this new supplier. I'm going to do my own pathogen testing. Yeah, I mean, you can, and that's within your right, but that could have some big ramifications, because a lot of times these are big lots. Yep. So let's say, for example, that lot of flour that's coming in, you're using in your facility multiple times. Okay, so that now means that you need to have hold and release in place for everything with that lot. And to your point, ready to eat, what happens if you find something? You need to look at these things closely.
Yeah, it's again a cost time benefit, or risk that you have to take. Yeah, no, I completely agree. It's within your right to do it. Is it necessarily best practice? I don't know. I think there's an argument to be made for that it's not.
Yeah. Sometimes within quality, right, we just think of things within our context, and you need to look at it from a business system standpoint as well too. You're also impacting potential other manufacturers, because if you test and have a hit on that lot, ethically, you need to tell that manufacturer, hey, guess what? I found salmonella in the flour you sent me. They now need to then track that down on their side and notify all the other customers that got that lot of flour. And this is why a lot of times, especially in that industry, you'll see these recalls that just go right. They're huge because everybody's using it and it impacts everyone. And FDA will say, well, all right, microbiologically in these products, I probably won't find it if I resample. Anybody who uses these lots, recall it all.
Yeah. There's major implications of it that I don't know that are worth it. I think the comment that just came in is sampling isn't a one size fits all. Is a great point. Again, it depends. Again, we keep going back to that. So yeah, it's a great comment.
Yeah, and definitely, and this is where I think experts like Caitlin and outside sources help, because you can then put together, to Jill's point, and thank you for that, Jill, is put together what you think is a good program and then ask experts and say, here's what I'm thinking from my program in my facility. Does this make sense to you? Sometimes just having that fresh set of eyes is invaluable.
Yep, absolutely.
So with the sample size, I think that's really important. The specialized ingredient. The other piece of this, which I think sometimes gets glossed over, Caitlin, in your food safety plans for dry products, is your target audience. And you had mentioned Coronabacter. And if you're manufacturing infant formula and you're making a dry product for your clients, right, these little babies, your risk profile is going to be very different.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, especially for Coronabacter. I mean, that's going to be really important for infants and high risk populations. So yeah, testing for that, testing for salmonella, testing for your indicator organisms, having more of a robust sampling plan for, especially for your environment as well, is going to be critical.
Yeah, and so you need to understand that as a manufacturer. You need to have and again, right, this relationship's a two-way street. Your company is selling these raw materials for further processing in most cases with dry ingredients, and you have those ready-to-eat products. So let's say that you're producing a product which then goes into a dry blend. Right? There's nothing that's it. Right? Whatever's in there is in there. Infant formula, huge, and I think infant formula really, and we saw this blow up, for lack of a better word here, a few years ago with infant formula. It was a perfect storm, right? All right, so we're making a dry product, we're making massive amounts of lots and production runs. We have a very sensitive consumer of this product, and we have a novel threat associated with this that we really didn't have an idea it was even a problem until a decade ago or so. You need to really look through these things and understand it really closely, and that's going to impact everything that we're talking about here today.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, it's a part of this as well, Caitlin. One of the things that we like to do here on the chat too is we talk about technical stuff. We also need to turn it into the people side of things. And Jill, with her company Catalyst, does a lot of work on this side too. Is that imagine put yourself in the shoes of that food safety manager at an infant formula company. How would you like to be working in a plant that causes illness or, God forbid, worse, for children? Right? How do you live with that? And that emotion and that reaction to making sure that you're keeping people safe needs to be employed into the process. And I think that's something that sometimes we gloss over because we're being too technical.
No, I think that's a great point. Because there is this whole human component to it. At the end of the day, we're making products for people, right? And for people consumption. So I think there needs to be some sort of education and reminder of the endpoint and the end user of all of this. I do get lost in the day-to-day of, making the technical, the step-by-step things, but really taking a step back and thinking about what I'm doing here today is going to impact someone down the line. And that's a person or, hopefully, a child or whatever. So just constant reminder of the end user in this process. And, what we're doing here in food safety in general is for the end user. So I think that's a great point of bringing the human element back into it.
Right. I mean, so back to the Boar's Head again, is that, Boar's Head's a privately held company. It's a family business. And they have, now killed 10 people. Imagine living with that burden, for the rest of your life. And if you're on the victim, and I use that word purposely, right? If you're on the victim side of the equation, so a lot of people here on the chat know Dr. Darren Detweiler, who lost his son to the Jack in the Box E. coli contamination issue. And what was strange about that as well too is that his son didn't directly eat contaminated product from Jack in the Box. His son became ill and sick from another sick child in daycare, right? So you got that cross contamination going there, and his life, right, was never the same, and it completely pivoted what he did, to help everybody else understand these risks. So we need to keep those elements in mind.
No, absolutely. I think you brought it up at the beginning of the show about how hopefully you never hear about us in the food
Yeah.
safety side. And that's for the best. I'd hope you never hear about the work that we do. But when you do, yeah, that's a heavy burden to carry. So I think it's easy to get caught up in the mundane of the day to day of what we do. But taking the
Mhm.
time to reflect on that, there's serious implications if we lose sight of what the day to day is trying to accomplish.
Yeah. And one of the most dangerous, phrases you can hear in food safety is, "Well, we've always done it that way." Eh, And if you hear that, for me, that's more of a warning bell than anything else. That means, uh-oh, right? And we saw this with Boar's Head. Bill Marler had posted a story on this where a sanitation manager who came into the company and saw these problems, tried to fix them, and met a brick wall, and he knew what was going to happen, and unfortunately it did, right? So is he going to be testifying in the court cases? Oh yeah, absolutely. um, so part of this, right, is so Duncan is saying here, how are those management decisions made, right? So within your company, and part of this, this kind of feels like a segue, but it's not, right? Because um, part of what we need to do within the company, and what we do, Caitlin, is making sure that the company understands the morality of what we're doing, and that why are we making these products, and why are we comfortable, as I talk about, why am I comfortable having my cup of coffee and not having it analyzed before I eat it? It's because of that trust element. And I've heard more than one person come to me. I've had a lot of conversations around Boar's Head, as I'm sure a lot of people have, is I'm never eating Boar's Head again. I don't care what the product is. They've shown me that they're not a reputable company. And when you go to a grocery store, I mean, and you go to the deli section, good luck finding another brand. You may have some private label and things like this, but Boar's Head has been the dominant player in that space for a long, long time. And that's going to change.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Um, no, I think that's a great point you bring up. Yeah, I just think we need to consider, what we're doing and why we're doing. I don't want to have to think about, anything that I put in, and eat during the day, and it's a real luxury that we have that. Um, and keeping people reminded, maybe that's part of the food safety culture in this field of just there's a reason why we're doing this. There's a reason why we're putting so much time and energy into these food safety practices, because there are devastating consequences if we don't take it seriously.
Right. And a big chunk of what we need to do in this space as technical people is educate outside of our bubble.
Yep.
And so when we have a natural disaster, so the hurricane, and oh my goodness, right? Terrible. All right. So power is down, transportation is out, resources are thin. Um, Food safety, right? You need to be thinking about that. So the water treatment systems within those locales, gone. So how are you managing at a personal level to make sure that what you're eating and what you're doing is safe, and educating people around you around those things as well? You see notifications, from different government agencies, hey, be careful, but most people aren't going to, if your house is 5 feet underwater, you're not reading notifications from the government, right? You're hoping that you can, find your dog and that everything is okay, and some of the other terrible things that we've seen coming out of this. We need to educate people around those things. Just the
And
simple practices in your home.
prior to an adverse event happening, right? So like you said, no
Yeah.
one's listening once the thing's already happened. It's getting that education in before something happens, so that
Mhm.
hopefully people can react prior to something, or know what to do when something does happen like that.
Yeah, and the weird stories that we're seeing coming out of here too is that, all right, you have an electric car, and now it's been exposed to a high level of water, and your car's shorted out. Okay, your car's done. And I also saw, who knows if this is true, right? We're kind of in the fog of war relative to information on the hurricane. But watch out for electric cars. If they get in contact with salt water, they could potentially, start on fire. True or not? I don't know. We'll see what kind of comes out of that. But all these weird things. So, for example, I was reading too that people couldn't get back into their houses because their little Ring cameras that everybody has installed to let you in don't work. They don't work now. So it's like, uh-oh, got a problem.
Yeah, yeah.
So I think, and this is kind of an interesting little side conversation we have on this because it's kind of coming back to the dry sanitation side of things. Is your plan is much more important than the execution in some ways, and you really need to understand that context of what you need to do in that dry facility. Is okay. I need to separate out my wet processes from my dry processes. I need to think about my people on those things of how they're doing that. Because a lot of those things on the people side as well, we talked about that sanitation crew side of things, Caitlin, but also just day-to-day people, management, QA people, who's trotting back and forth between those different areas in those plants. A lot of times, whoever's operating the dryer needs to understand information on the solids and all these type of things to have a good dried product. So he's going back and forth to the lab to get samples tested. Where's that person going? Right? And what are they tracking back and forth between those two different areas that you don't know about? A lot of times in dry areas, you'll have floor mats, with powdered quat in these type of things. And you'll see these pictures in plants where the stuff just gets tracked everywhere. Right? So is that a potential contamination risk? You need to think about those things.
Yeah, and being proactive. I mean, you're never going to know what the problem is until you have the problem, but ask those questions, right? So as you're developing your plan, what can go wrong? If what goes wrong at this point, what can go wrong here? And work through those, how would you solve this if X, Y, and Z happened? How would you address that? So yeah, being proactive. I saw that comment come in, proactive approach
Yeah.
into creating this. You're never going to know what the plan is, or the problem is that you might run into, but be proactive, think about what could happen and design a plan and have an idea of a plan in place of what you're going to do if that should happen. Because,
Yeah.
like the hurricane, it's too late to put that plan in action. You're panicking, and
Right.
that's not a good time to put a plan in place is when you're panicking.
Yep. The time to build the plan is before you need it. To Cortland's point here, you need a disaster recovery plan.
Yep.
So, a couple really good examples in that area are then, okay, we need a disaster recovery plan. So you have these production facilities in these areas, power goes out, all your equipment shuts down, and now you need to do a restart. You need to think about what's the correct way to do that. You have a massive rainstorm from the hurricane. Now all of a sudden you've got puddles of water in your dry plant from the roof. All right, what's hanging up on the roof? Birds. What are birds depositing on your roof? Salmonella. Now that's getting down in your plant, and if your dry plant employees don't understand the risk of that, and they're chomping through that puddle and walking around through the dry plant, they're doing a really good job at distributing that pathogen around in that dry facility.
Yep. No, absolutely. It's great points.
Yeah. So one of the things that definitely, and this got me really excited too, because you're on the cutting edge of a lot of these different things. And one of the things I wanted to dive into with you today here as well, Caitlin, is new stuff, new
Yeah.
technologies coming out. What are you seeing out there?
Yeah, let's talk about new science.
Yeah.
So I have to put a shameless plug in for some work that we're funding right now. So it's working on developing a non-polar liquid antimicrobial system. So the idea stems from looking for an alternative to alcohols, which could have, you need to wait for your equipment to cool down before you can use it. It has a low flash point. There could be some sort of, fire component risk to it. So what's something that doesn't involve, alcohol? What's an alternative? So this researcher out of UMass is working on this non-polar liquid antimicrobial delivery system, and it's combining your organic acid with a non-polar liquid to deliver that organic acid, which is going to be your antimicrobial. So yeah, it's utilizing this hydrophobic environment with those non-polar liquids to deliver that antimicrobial. It has a higher flash point compared to ethanol and isopropanol, so giving a little bit more of a safety component. I know there's residue testing going on with it because obviously that's a concern. We don't want to use anything in the system that's going to then deposit a residue back into the system. So that's really cool work that's going on a more like chemistry level, which I think is really fascinating. There's also work going on at Cornell on superheated steam or dry
Mm.
steam, I think it's more colloquial called. It doesn't leave moisture or condensation on the surfaces. Data has shown that it's been effective at pathogen inactivation in well-controlled environments. So I put that little caveat there.
Uh-huh.
When testing was expanded to more facility-based environments, there's an issue with the temperature decreasing the further the nozzles away from the food contact surface. So that
Oh,
decreases efficacy, right? So that temperature is reliant on that kill. So the farther you're away from that, so there's some practical limitations to that technology that's coming out that still needs to be figured out. So there's some cool stuff on the horizons that are giving us some different alternatives and for dry sanitation.
well, and also it's a little riskier from a personal safety standpoint. You're
Exactly. Yeah.
dealing with highly pressurized,
Yep.
high intensity steam, and you have to be close to the surface.
Yes.
How are you doing that, and how are you making sure that your team is safe?
Yeah. So it looks like it's great in well controlled environments. We'll see if they can figure out some of those more practical concerns. Because then, yeah, again, getting in between all of those nooks and crannies in your production facility is another challenge. Just physically getting there, right, is an issue, and as well as distance and control. So yeah, we'll see if they can figure out some of those more practical solutions as that technology develops.
Interesting. So Larry had a question here for you.
Yeah.
Is what does the data say about the antimicrobial results? How long of a test plan?
For the dry sanit or for the dry steam or for the non-polar liquid technology.
Yeah, yeah. Give us a little more clarification there, Larry. So
I was
we'll
going to
wait
say
for
both
more
are
information on that.
still the non-polar is still under development, so I don't know that I can really release too much of the data on that. It looks promising, I can say. Um, I know the dry steam had some pretty solid kills on the or for the pathogens for that study. But yeah, TBD on the non-polar. Hopefully, we'll be able to release that data soon.
Interesting. So Duncan was asking about paracetic acid. Any comments on that?
Yeah, that's a great option as well. I know there's a bunch of different testing going on with that as well, but yeah, efficacy is great. Yeah.
hmm let's see here. So Larry was saying so for both. So what do you got for both of those areas? If there's anything further you could clarify.
Yeah, like I said, the data's still coming out on the non-polar liquid, so
Yeah.
hopefully we'll have that in the coming months. And then, yeah, in great conditions, the dry steam seems pretty effective against a wide variety of pathogens. We just need to see if we can get it more effective in a real world scenario.
Gotcha. Yeah, yeah. Duncan here is saying alcohol, all right? Yeah, works really well. Surfaces have to be clean, right? With any type of a sanitizing process, you have to have a good environment to do that. You can't sanitize dirt. I think that's what Neil had said before as
Yeah,
well.
it's a great point.
And you can't. And plus, there's also a safety risk, right? So now you have, of course, these type of chemicals are really volatile and easy to go into an aerosol type solution. You have to be super, super careful. And that's a huge concern on the dry side of things. So sugar, flour, we've seen explosions from I think was it there was a sugar processor in Savannah, Georgia here a number of years ago that had a gigantic explosion at their facility. So your equipment needs to be designed for that as well.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. Yeah, I don't think we touched on that, but yeah, your design of your equipment meant for dry sanitation is another key consideration when you're designing your plant. If you can design your
Yep.
plant, obviously from scratch, but yeah, that's a key another consideration in your plan.
Yep. What about so one of the things that I'm always concerned about in dry products is spores and anything going on in that area as far as spore inactivation.
Yeah, that's a great question. I actually just submitted an IAFP proposal on spore inactivation, so hopefully that will get accepted. Yeah, there's some work going on there, particularly in Europe. I can't really speak to the details of it. I'm not as familiar with the spore work, but I know it's more common over in the European countries rather than here. But yeah, hopefully more information could come out on the spores as well, especially with bacillus.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. You just hit a hot button there for me, right? So, Bacillus cereus, right? It's been kind of the stepchild of pathogens, and it's becoming more and more important. Used to be, oh, that's the sick. You get sick from the potato salad that sits out at the church brunch, and it gets some toxin produced in there. But we're seeing, Caitlin, more and more of is in these new spaces and these alternate ingredients that are being developed. So plant proteins, anything that's in close contact with the earth through that process. So pea and rice and oats and all these type of things have a higher incident rate and a higher risk associated with this. and you can get spores. And if your process itself is then selecting for certain types of spores, so thermophiles, mesophiles, things like this, you need to understand that as well for your process, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's great points. I know there's some work going on about psychotropic also too, about spores.
Mm.
So, refrigeration temperature, which is, yeah, kind of surprising to me as well. So I'm kind of curious how that's going to play out once that data is released. But yeah, no, that's great point about
Mm.
spores. That's probably a whole nother separate show
Oh
and
yeah. Oh, yeah.
conversation.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And anything relative to aerobic versus anaerobic in those capacities? Are you seeing any differences there from a technical standpoint?
Um, I'm not as familiar with that data. I'm more on the, pathogens. My expertise is in Salmonella, Listeria, and that. But yeah, I'd be interested to see if that's playing a role.
Yeah, I mean, it just seems like anecdotally over the past few years, I've seen, a few more, botulism, Clostridium botulinum cases than you would
Yeah,
normally expect to see. So I'm curious if there's something developing in that area.
yeah. It seems like I mean, it's kind of hard in food safety. There's always something popping up and something new and a new concern. So it's
And
it'll
that's
be interesting to see how
that's
that.
why I love microbiology, right? That's why we love it, because we're dealing with an adversary that's constantly evolving and changing, and figuring out new ways to create a niche and all these type of things. So
Yeah,
one
never
last
bored.
question
That's
here
for
for you
sure.
is Larry wanted to know about dry ice cleaning. Any thoughts around that?
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I'm not familiar with dry ice cleaning, so I don't know that I can provide any perspective on that. But interesting.
Yeah, so yeah, I know very little about that as well. Is that yeah? So you have essentially pelletized, carbon dioxide particles that which you then blast at a surface, which
Interesting.
then evaporate off. There's obviously safety concerns with that then as well. You're like, oh, it's carbon dioxide, it's fine. Well, if you're cleaning stuff in a confined space and you're creating this nice cloud of carbon dioxide, you have to be careful with asphyxiation, and
Yeah,
you can end up with some bad results there as well too.
yeah, absolutely.
Ergot poisoning. Wow. All right, we're going down some rabbit holes here for sure, Duncan, as well.
All
But
good.
one of the things that I promised her with the chat, Caitlin, is how amazingly fast it goes. And guess what? We're already at the 56-minute mark. So let's kind of bring this back up to the 30,000-foot level. Fascinating conversation here today. What would you like our audience to leave with today?
Yeah, I think dry sanitation is probably isn't clarifying, but it's complicated, right? And it depends. So yeah, taking a look at how this applies to your own system is going to be critical. I love the call out that we had. I know it was a bit of a side conversation, but the call to collaboration, within different commodities and different fields, I think that could not be more important at this time. Is to talk to each other, collaborate, um, learn from each other, ask questions. I think that's a statement that came up a lot throughout our conversation. Ask your suppliers, talk to other people who know more than you. So ask those questions.
Yeah,
That's my
yeah,
call.
and that's what's so cool about it, as you're seeing here with the chat, the amazing knowledge base we have here with the participants, and just here within this short period of time, the amount of information we're sharing is so Elena's saying here that she used CO2 and it's great for equipment that isn't water rated and was sensitive to electrical components. Oh, good point.
Yeah.
Is that a lot of times in facilities, Caitlin, what you'll see, and this is true in dry areas as well, is regardless of what cleaning methodologies we're talking about here to get to this, plants cover up the electrical panels, the PLCs, the switches, and FDA loves to sample from an environmental monitoring standpoint those secondary zone 2 surfaces that don't get cleaned. So thanks,
Yeah.
Elena, for bringing that up.
Yeah.
How are those getting cleaned? And to Duncan's point, that may be the perfect opportunity then to use that ethanol alcohol wipes on those surfaces before you start production to clean them, and doing it in a way that's friendly to the equipment, because that's a huge part of this too that we didn't
Yeah,
really talk about.
absolutely. It's a great point.
Yeah, if your cleaning methodologies are destroying your equipment, yeah, not good.
Got a bigger problem there.
Um, yeah, exactly. So, wow, guys, thank you. I love this. Hey, Wendelin, good to see you. Wendelin was a guest here on the chat a while
Oh,
ago too. We had a fantastic conversation.
oh,
So thanks
awesome.
for joining us. So this week, guys, unfortunately, time ran out. So this is the end of the chat here for this week. Fantastic, Caitlin. Thank you very much for your insights.
Yeah,
Really
absolutely.
interesting.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's glad to have you on. And so, of course, guys, back here next week at the same time, so where we live stream on LinkedIn and YouTube at 8 a.m. Mountain Time, 10 a.m. Eastern, where I'll bring on another amazing guest like Caitlin here, who can help us all figure out what are those things that we need to be thinking about. In the meantime, enjoy your weekend. You earned it. Have a great time. The leaves are turning. It's a beautiful time of year, one of my favorite times of year. Tim isn't going to have any travail, so that's always a good thing. So glad that things are working out. Cortland, thank you, everybody. Amazing comments. Really enjoyed it today. So have a great one. We'll see you back here next week. Thanks, everybody. See you then.